over the years, there have been many different innovators in the field of animation. People like Ed Catmull, Nick Pollock, Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett, Tex Avery, Ralph Bakshi, Walt Disney, the Nine Old Men, and iWorks, and several others that just come in and have changed the animation sector in some ways. These people have made the whole animation world a battleground for everybody. But there was one name I neglected to mention. A person who, at one point, could beat Disney on his own game. But unfortunately, that road was very short. And this person had to try and find his way back into the sphere. And just when he had it, it was lost within an instant. A person who worked at Disney at one point, but he knew he had more ambition than just that. And that person was Don Bluth. And today, on this episode of Down the Animated Rabbit Hole, we're going to be looking at the history and the rise and fall of his career. Greetings everybody, I'm Going Thomas 45, or Thomas and Molly 45. Watching the Great Long Film Podcast presents Down the Animated Rabbit Hole, and this is the rise and fall of Don Bluth.
Things are gonna get crazy.
Everyone's mad here.
Our story begins in Payson, Utah. Don Bluth was born in 1937 in a small farm that had several kids. When he was around 4 years old, he went to his local theater to see a film that changed his life forever called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He was mesmerized by this film, and eventually he got... You draw and draw and draw. Eventually, that luck would soon pay off when he got hired at Disney at the age of 20 in 1957 for an assistant animator role on Sleeping Beauty. Afterwards, he went to become more missionary in South America. When he came back to the United States, he eventually went in the theater with his younger brother Toby. There were some good times there, but Don wasn't content owning just a theater. He wanted to get an animation even better. So he decided to work at small with Filmation Studios. He was working on such projects as the Archie's cartoon. He was even promoted to the head of the department. Then in 1971, he returned back to Disney to work on Robin Hood. Then later on, he worked on 2 more films, Winnie the Pooh and Ticket 2, and The Rescuers, along with working on the 1929 Pete's Dragon, the animation supervisor. He also did the seasonal short, the smaller one, on Disney, a seasonal short that got him some recognition. While the small one was his first ever directing gig, his first true gig as an independent though was Banjo The Woodpile Cat. It's about a bellish little kitten named Banjo who eventually who runs away to his farm and ends up in Salt Lake City. Moments later, he realizes that was a bad idea. So about a cat named Crazy Legs and other cats, he has to find his way to help out and get back home. It's a story, really. Part of it was actually autobiographical. As Don Bluth had a cat that initially, later on, ran away and somehow came back weeks later. Although I highly doubt that cat went to Salt Lake City and also later on hung with some street cats. Speaking of all this, Don Bluth and Goldman wrote all the songs in the film, which short, even though it's 30 minutes, took around 4 years to make. When it was pitched to Ron Miller, Disney rejected because they wondered when the hell would this become a movie idea. However, Don got 2 guys to help out of his garage, who we've been talking about a lot in this movie area, Gary Goldman and John Pomeroy. They both worked out their nights and days in his garage, and even did overtime with the whole film. Even though the film itself has only time of 30 minutes, it took 4.5 years to get made. Initially, it was meant to be a film. There was many other characters too, including a cricket and a girl named Rocco, along with a film being darker and having a scene during a fight with Crazy Legs and Rocco, and Banjo helped kill off Rocco in time. However, they decided to ditch all those things. They decided to ditch Rocco, Dr. Toad, the cricket, and making this a film. They even tried making this into a Christmas movie too. However, Don Bluth unfortunately said that Christmas didn't really work for them. You can still see elements of this somehow though, including the wintry aesthetic, snow being on the ground, and Crazy Legs being judged by Santa at one point. The film was finished in 1979 and released December of that year. It was first put in theaters with the Muppet movie, but that didn't happen. And the show itself is a quite simple little short. There really isn't much going on here. It's pretty simple, short, but it's fun to watch, and it really does give the idea down of a start of Don Bluth's career. But while that show was quite and simple, Don Bluth noticed something. The magic of Disney wasn't there anymore. What do I mean by that? Well, even though Disney was still making money, the magic from the old films really wasn't the same. And let's face it, Robin Hood and the Rescuers really never set on fire as much as other Disney films. Noticing this, Don Bluth and 14 other animators all left that year, in 1909 on September 13th, his birthday nonetheless. Decided finally quit the jobs at Disney to work on their own features. Did this the actually thing? Yeah, kinda. The film they were working on at the time, The Fox and Hound, had to be a little delayed from 1980 to 1981 because of this whole shakeup. The papers called them the Disney Defectors. During this time, they had see Xanadu they do for animation sequence. Even though in this film, it really has nothing to do with the whole plot of Xanadu, much like the rest of the movie. Well, that was a nice little gig and all. Their first real gig was a film called The Secret of Nimh. It's about Mrs. Brisby, a widowed field mouse, and who has to move her family away from the giant plow with her father's. But there's a catch. So here's Timmy has pneumonia and can't get out of bed, so she has to go to the Great Owl and save the farm. Who tells her that there's a bunch of rats of Nimh who can help out in this case. Now Mr. Brisby has to go to these rats and help iron out himself. Initially, this was also planned to be for Disney. However, Disney rejected it for being too dark at the time. This was during a trend where films were tending to be more and more geared towards adults in terms of their attitudes, and we're trying to get more and more mature themes in a G-rated film. And this film is one example of that. During the production, they really had to they made the film on so that they had to give the film time for that. However, there was a bit of an issue. MGM may have picked the rights to distribute it, but when making a war of films, only gave the film $7 million and 30 months of production work. Bluth, Goldman, and John Pomeroy all had to sell their homes to get this movie made. To make the money in the film, they used different techniques, including split exposure, and making the film in more cheap and more old techniques. Don wanted this film to feel like it was made in the 1950s instead of 1980s. The casting of this movie was also pivotal too. This would be the last film for Elizabeth Hartman, who played Mrs. Brisby, and her memory badly plays that issue before their deaths. Hartman would die in 1987, while Badley would die in 1986. However, this will also be the first film for Sharon Doherty and Will Wheaton. This will also be the first film for Don Bluth to feature an actor who will later appear in several other films of his. Dom DeLuise, here playing Jeremy, a rather ditzy crow who helps out Mrs. Brisby in many ways.
Thank you so much.
It is what? It is? I mean, it is. Well,
The film itself afterwards was a bit had a bit of an emergency. See, this film was based off of Mrs. Frisby in Nimh in 1980, and the reason why is because the character was named Mrs. Frisby. I'm not kidding, by the way. That actually was a big problem. They had to change the name so they get sued by Wabbo, who's the maker of the Frisbee disc. Frisbee is technically a copyright term, similar to how Kleenex and Windex are technically copyright terms and not general terms. It's just become so universal that you forget that they're a copyright term. Because of how close it is, however, there was one big catch. Everybody else had already finished their lines and all said Frisbee and not Brisby. To fix this, they had to take the audio lines of words like breeze and put in for the words for brr, as in like Brisby. You have no idea how close of a call this was. And even though they had the grounds of it, they eventually did ask yes to change it. When it was released in 1982, critics loved the film, saying that it was like an old school film from Disney from the 50s and 60s. However, at the box office, it did set the world on fire, only making $14 million, roughly double its own budget. So, the main reason why it did do well is because there's very little promotion of the film. The release dates were totally different in other areas, and the biggest block, and it was released at the same time as another gigantic blockbuster, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which became the highest grossing film in 1982. In 1998, there was a sequel to Secret Of Nimh called Timmy to the Rescue. I haven't seen it, but it sucks. And by the way, if you're wondering, no, I will not be talking much about the Don Bluth sequels. With the exception of one that's coming up later, I will not be mentioning much of the sequels because Don Bluth had nothing to do with them. And most of these were direct to video. Just want to let you know. As for the Secret Of Nimh itself though, honestly, this film is great. The animation is spectacular, the characters are great, the voice acting is on par, the soundtrack composed by Jerry Goldsmith is great, and the whole film and the story is amazing. This is easily Don Bluth's best film in my opinion. I know some others might have other films, but me personally, you can't get better than this film. However, while this film was great, it still didn't make much money at the box office. Because of this and the animated strike in 1982, Don Bluth's company had to file bankruptcy. Later that year, they formed as Bluth Group to make video games. Their first video game was Dragon's Lair. It's about Dirk the Daring, who has to save a princess named Daphne from the evil clutches of the Lizard King, in a Dungeness Dragon. Don Bluth himself was not a gamer, and when he was planning to make a real game of this, after making Secret Of Nimh, he had to figure out ways to get fun. The budget of this game was $1 million. I'm not sure how much that is in 1980s video gaming, but I know that in animation terms, that is chump change. And I think that Dragon's Lair can fit in the animation sector just fine. Because of this, they couldn't really hire a reference model of Daphne, just Daphne, and instead they used magazine covers instead. They also had to use people from the crew to play as main characters. I'm not entirely sure which crew members they used, but they did use several. Because of the game initially was one of the most expensive arcade units ever. How did they balance this? Jacking the prices! Instead of doing the usual 25 cents, 50 cents were now required for this game. Double the price, double the payment. To make it all feel natural, there was never any scene. There was some scenes that people have rumored to get in. There was mention of a scene that you had to go into the castle. However, that rumor was actually not given out. Dragon's Lair is also known to be quite hard. However, on home consoles, they have been ways to be easier, whether it be blinking lights, buttons you could use, or anything else, lights, or having a lights, or even beeps and bloops to help out. The game itself in Resident Evil 3 was successful enough to get selling at least enough copies. There's even a theory that there's even a rumor I've heard of one person making his entire video game arcade into a movie theater to play Dragon Slayer. Now that sounds ridiculous, but I do want to see if that actually was a true thing. Except what was Space Ace. It's about a character named Ace who gets stripped down to a whippy teen named Dexter, all of a sudden, Dexter has to save his girlfriend Kimberly from the evil clutches of the alien master Bluth. Now there was no way in hell this is no more cliche than what we got here. Yeah. Like Dragon Slayer, it was originally tested for arcades. They wanted to make this more into some of a mini movie, having more of a storyline. As Dragon Slayer have a story to give it. They even added these extra yellow flashes to get in. Yeah. Like Dragon Slayer, they couldn't really hire members of the crew. Don did try to get some actors, mainly Paul Shenner to play as Bluth, but instead it was him who actually did the voice of Bluth in a game. They even tried getting Eddie Deason to play Dexter, which, funny enough, Eddie Deason is probably more one playing Man-Dog in Dexter's Laboratory, which I just find hilarious that that actually will later become a thing. Anyways, the game itself was making a bit more different. However, when Resident Evil 4, it didn't get a lot of fanfare, and that was mainly because of the video game crash into E3. I will not mention it here because I have another episode planned for it, but basically, the game itself, and because of the big crash into E3, Cinematronics, the company that made Dragon Slayer and Space Ace arcades, filed bankruptcy during this time. During this time, Don Bluth and his crew worked on two other games. A sequel to Dragon Slayer called Dragon Slayer 2 Time Warp, and a game called Sea Beast. Both games, however, were both cancelled afterwards. We'll get back to Dragon Slayer 2 in a bit. Because eventually, Cinematronics will eventually make a liquidation sale because of all this. And as such, and I was selling all the units of Dragon Slayer and Space Ace they had in them. Eventually, the Don Bluth Code also filed bankruptcy. It seemed that Don's company couldn't catch a break. Now, yes, his features were amazing, and his games were fun to play, but nothing was going to be a success for him. Secret Of Nimh didn't prove to be much good at box office, and the game crashed in 1983 hobbled any success his video games could have had. He needed help quickly. Eventually, he met a person named Morris Sullivan, and who would help out these companies. Morris Sullivan would help out make this studio itself. However, this was again when they were facing bankruptcy issues. Luckily, help came along in the form of Steven Spielberg. Spielberg had saw Secret Of Nimh and loved it. And this is a guy who loves classical Disney animation. And seeing this, he almost thought Disney film. And asked Don to help him on a film that he was hoping to get made too. They both agreed and both helped out in this case. The film they made was a mega tale. It's about a Russian Jewish field mouse named Fievel Baskowitz, who has to escape, who has to move out of his home, where his house is destroyed by a bunch of cats. However, they all immigrated to the United States. However, around the time the Statue of Liberty was being built. However, Fievel eventually gets stranded into another part is far from the animation part and has to survive the dangerous streets of New York. The idea of this film came of a small storyline of what if they had a film about mice during the time the Statue of Liberty was being built. For the role of Fievel, they hired a kid named Philip Glasser for the film. Philip would eventually do work on other films with Don Bluth, but we'll get back to that. And then we hired Don DeLuise to do the voice of Tiger. As for the animation, it was again given a simple using the old techniques they had on Nimh, along with other things. The name Fievel came from Spielberg's grandpa. However, other than Spielberg, everyone's kind of confused if they should use that name, as it's a weird foreign name. But whatever, it seemed to work out fine, and it's on in the movie. During this time, though, there were always some issues. You'd think that Spielberg there'd be more money, but no. Unfortunately, the budget was still $7 million. It didn't really seem like there was. Not only that, but security was the best too. Because of Spielberg and Amblin, they made sure that you couldn't talk about this film, and they had to mention that this film was off. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that they don't get no time off either? So when the husbands came out to work in the day, they couldn't tell them, otherwise it'd be leaked everywhere. This film had to be made in secret. During this time, they figured they had to reuse some of the idea. They actually got to reuse the idea of Rocco. However, this time they changed it from a Rocco into the character Warren T. Rat, and that cricket from Banjo The Woodpile Cat was later his model was later used for Digit, who was voiced by Will Ryan. The film itself was eventually released on Thanksgiving of 1986, and it became a hit. The mega tail soared into the first ever to a huge name in 1986, becoming the highest grossing non-Disney film at that time, and making a total of $84.5 million. So much so that Disney released Great Mouse Detective. And guess what? Fievel won that battle. With critics though, it was up and down. Some critics liked it, while others like Roger Ebert were more mixed. It eventually even won a Grammy for the song Somewhere Out There, and got nominated for many awards too. Fievel himself really had his own franchise, including a sequel called Fievel Goes West, which was released by Spielberg's company Amblin Animation, and two other sequels along with TV series that Don Bluth had nothing to do with again. Fievel Goes West is also one of the very few sequels to actually get a theatrical release, which I totally understand. It's about as good. It's not really all that great, but still. As for the original Mega Tail, it's surprisingly charming. I wouldn't put this as his top film, but I would say it's a good film nonetheless. It's surprisingly charming, and it feels like it made easily that this is a film that's impressionable for young kids. Well, yes, the film is easily to tell. I would say this Mega Tail is a fun-filled adventure for kids and parents to watch together, regardless of how they feel. Personally, if there's a Don Bluth film that you should probably introduce to, this is probably a good film to start off with. Wasn't maybe his first film, this is the first one to give him an overview of style. 2 years afterwards, his next film will be made, called The Land Before Time. It's about Littlefoot, a big long-necked dinosaur, who has to live with mother and meets a tree comes out. However, a Sharptooth has battled his mother. However, while his mother eventually beats the battle of Sharptooth, she is mortally wounded and dies in the film. Meanwhile, Littlefoot actually meets other characters like Sarah, a three-horn, Ducky, a big mouth, Petrie, a flyer, and a spytail, as they would all have a journey to go to the Great Valley. The reason why I'm using simplistic names is just because that's how they use it in the film. These are actually not the names of dinosaurs, obviously. These are just simplistic names that you would get every now and then. During production of the film, it was chaos. They wanted to make the film in 1981, after American was released, and they wanted it out in 1987. A bit of an issue right there. The film itself, however, was initially worked on early, and another reason why. The company's main financial expert, Morris Sullivan, was planning to move the studio to Ireland. And because of the transfer time from the United States to Ireland, the film itself was delayed to 1988. Not only that, but But Spielberg and Bluth had barely any time to talk to each other. Mainly because Bluth was too busy on Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Always. And not only that, but they had to figure out ways to make the film without even having a script locked. So to keep the animators busy, they made this opening segment that has really not much to do with the film. Has anyone else noticed that besides me? Maybe not. Anyways, to get the film being made, they all had agreed to help on film. The initial running time of this film was 80 minutes. However, when test screens came back, it was seen to be too dark for kids. They had to cut around 11 minutes of the film. Scenes including having shark tooth and one scene featuring some, I guess they were called bunk pads, I'm not totally sure, but some Pachycephalosaurus were cut. They even tried showing up the love of his mother's death scene. However, they lost some time conscious. However, they told him to leave it in the film for that reason. Unfortunately, the film, after all was cut, ran to a limit of 68 minutes, making it the shortest film Don Bluth would ever make to release in theaters. When it was released in 1988, I believe you that another film came out at the exact same time. When I mean the exact same time, I'm not making an exaggeration. I mean that quite literally. It released on November 18th, 1988, the same day as Disney's Oliver and Company. So, which film was on top? Well, in terms of the box office domestically, Oliver won that battle. But frustrating worldwide, Littlefoot won that battle. As for critics, Land of Time won that battle too bit easily. Getting a thumbs up from Siskel and Ebert. And it's probably for the best, as Land of Time is a great movie. This film really has a weight and urgency in this film, and it really feels like exactly what it is. It may be short, but that means it doesn't waste its time. It knows what it's doing, and it gets on with it very quickly. Despite this film is quite short running time, everything feels like it moves with a purpose. And as such, this film is instrumental in how things work out. He's making one of the best things ever. However, there's one thing to know about The Land of Time that's probably more famous than the film itself, is the fact that it has 13 sequels. Granted, I'm talking about 0 of them, but still, how in the hell is Land of Time this big of a franchise? There's even a TV series based off it too. Granted, none of this has Don Bluth's involvement in it, again, but still. I just have to mention this because I knew somebody would say that I missed that there was a ton of Land of Time sequels and a TV series by too. At this point, Don Bluth and his crew were at their peak. With 2 successful films under the belt, and they were ready to make more. Sullivan was ready to expand the project. He expanded the project by making more and more movies, whether it be making more films out from the biggest name out of Ireland in terms of animation, because I don't think music-wise it will be that would not be happening. But he also want to be a distributor for other anime films, and also be a bit of a helper and consultant on films that came out of the island face, along with making TV cartoons that have the same theatrical budget of those anime films. However, there was a bit of a catch. Don and his friends thought they were moving a bit too fast. And because of all of this, they had to figure out a way to make this all seem more and more real in this case. It didn't help also that this was during the time when they were trying to make movies pure for VHS buckets. So they couldn't really have a big rebate on helping out. Luckily, there was a big helper with the whole film. In 1980, and they started making the next feature coming out afterwards. The next film was titled All Dogs Go to Heaven. So Charlie B. Bulkin, whom with help of his friend Itchy Itchaford, escapes the pound and gets back with his old buddy Carface. Except for one catch. Carface doesn't want a thing around at Charlie. So as such, he decides to knock him out with his car. He's dead, and he actually succeeds and kills him. The end. Nah, just kidding, that would be a very short movie. Instead, he goes back to Earth to rewrite his life watch and all that, only with the stipulation that he can never return afterwards to heaven. In this universe, dogs can only get a free pass into heaven because they're naturally good. Meanwhile, after fighting Hitchy, they meet Girl and Anne-Marie, who can transfer themselves animals, and they use it to con their way out of a lot of money. This is our protagonist, people, the one we're meant to be rooting for. However, eventually, Charlie has an affair for Anne-Marie and will eventually save her from Carface, vicious predators, and the big-lipped alligator. Actually, this was part back when Don Bluth was done with Secret Of Nimh. He wanted to make 3 animated shorts with a dog to an eye, voiced by Burt Reynolds. However, this project never got off the ground due to bankruptcy. Fast forward to 1986, the project resumed after the American Tale was practically just finished. This would be also the first time that Don Bluth would not get help. Instead, he was on his own since Secret Of Nimh. For casting, they got Don Bluth again and Burt Reynolds to play as both Itchy and Charlie respectively. They actually both recorded lines in peace and together, as both of them had experience working together on several different films. They also did the same thing with 2 other actors, Rick Tayback, who would play Carface, and Charles Nelson Riley, who played Killer in this case. Charles Nelson Riley would come back to do several other roles for Don Bluth films that we'll mention later on. This was also Rick Tayback's last film before he passed away in 1990. Speaking of deaths, this will also be the last film before child actress Judith Busty, who played Anne-Marie in this film. She also played Ducky in Life of Time before she passed. I won't tell you the full story, but basically she had died in 1988. This film itself was laid on dedicated to her memory. Because there was no involvement from Spielberg or Amblin, Don Bluth was free to make this film however he wanted it to. He was hired by a company named Gold Quest Films, whom with MGM would have distributed this film. When looking at the anime tone, they had to again do some cuts, and eventually change the film rating from PG to G, including cutting out some lines, removing a swear word in the Let There Be Surprise number, which, fun fact, is still in the soundtrack number for some reason. I have no idea why.
Damn that Carface, I'll kill him.
And removing a lot of the darker scenes, like the car scene and Charlie saying going to hell. There was a rumor, there was a time when Don Bluth had this other negative. However, that initial one has since been to be stolen by Bluth himself. However, working in 1989, it was like Lair of Time. It released on November 17, 1989, the same day as the Disney film, except that this was not like The Lair of Time at all in terms of success. Instead, the film that came out at the same time as it was Disney's The Little Mermaid. And unfortunately, it did not go well for All Dogs. All Dogs had a budget of $13 million. The most expensive dog, unfortunately, and it only made $27 million. Almost. As for critics, it was really mixed. And to this day, it remains Don Bluth's most divisive animated film, with some critics liking it and some people hating it. Me personally, I might be one of those people who actually likes this film. Granted, it isn't perfect. I have issues with the tone of this movie and the songs. As much as catchy they are, they don't have much of a purpose in this movie. Yes. However, what I think works is how it actually works as a movie. The animation is great, the acting is pretty good, and the characters are actually quite likable, despite how despicable they could be at first. I always viewed Charlie as sort of this con artist with a heart of gold, and I got that perfectly well. Plus, I how that Burt Reynolds really does a great job with the performance he's been giving.
So Robin Hood says to Little John, "This sheriff is a real bimbo. Now, let's say we knock him off and take the gold. Not for ourselves, but we'll give it to the poor, worthless suckers who took it."
However, because of the Old Dogs of Heaven did make money back, however, it'd be the last time Don Bluth would ever see any sort of money being made back on any of his films. Why? Well, we'll get into that after the break.
A hero out to save a missing princess.
Dimitri!
Hold on!
Now the bridge is out.
Come on, there's gotta be something better than this!
The fuse is lit.
That'll work!
The chase is on.
It starts with a
And the thrills begin.
We're gonna have to jump!
After you!
On November 21st,
No one can save you!
wanna bet? The adventure lives. Anastasia, rated G, November 21st, only in theaters.
So what do I mean that Old Dogs will be the last time for a while that Don Bluth would ever see much success at the box office? And even then, Old Dogs was a box office disappointment. Well, because of the poor returns of Old Dogs, Goldcrest Films announced after the next movie they would end a partnership with Don Bluth, and MGM would not release the next films afterwards. After the next film, Don wanted to get other ways to make money. They even tried making more and more films afterwards during this time, like The Velveteen Rabbit and The Blue Whale. However, both were cancelled. But luckily, they had a third film in the works that they could easily try out to see if they could at least still make money. That film was titled Rock-A-Doodle. It's about Rooster and Chanticleer, whose power is to bring up the sun every day. However, one day the sun rose without him, and he was almost teased him for being a fraud. So he walked away that one day. It turns out though that Chanticleer is actually key to bring up the sun, as during the storm, King Edmund has to experience the after effects of the not happening, and Chanticleer himself has to eventually all the characters from the book, including the Granny Owls, the main villain, come into the room. The Granny Owls turns Edmund into a cat, or in the film, he says, well, it's supposed to say I'm all furry, but it sounds like he's saying I'm a furry. Weird. I know it's a weird lisp thing. It's just thing. I should know. I have a lisp myself, but still, even I don't get it all times. Meanwhile, Edmund and some of the friends of Chanticleer decides to help out with the film. In a sense, and find Chanticleer to help stop this whole rainstorm from happening. Now, I know Don Bluth was looking at Disney at this point, but we actually want to go back with Disney. Ever since the 40s, Chanticleer actually have been being made during the time to try to see if they get a movie out. Unfortunately, these attempts during the 40s were all made during the start in 19 because of World War II and because of Disney's financial issues during the time. Fast forward to the 1960s, there was another attempt back then. The competition between two films after the event of 101 Dalmatians was finished. They had the idea of trying to make two films. Of course, they had the idea to make Chanticleer, and which almost everyone was working on. The other person who was not working on Chanticleer was storyman Bill Peet, who was working on a film based on the King Arthur legends around the same time. When, just quote the Sword in the Stone, when they both pitched ideas to Disney, the Sword in the Stone won out. Walt Disney had issues with the idea of having a rooster as the main character, the story of the film, and the fact that Chanticleer was, pardon the pun, a rather cocky cock. And as such, he eventually changed the film. He eventually scrapped it. Fast forward to the 1980s, Don Bluth and got the film afterwards, and initially planning a fully animated feature. However, after he saw the film Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he added live action bits that would be filmed in black and white, like as if they were from The Wizard of Oz. Initially, Rock-A-Doodle was meant they hired Glenn Campbell as they loved his yodeling for the film. For the live action segments, and they initially hired Victor French, who did the main episode of Get Spot. However, he gained terminal lung cancer during his time. And unfortunately, Bluth had to do all this, had to basically do both live action and the animation. The footage of the live action have been made into the film itself. Bluth said, another change was made was the reason why the sun never rises up. There's no reason at all why. To avoid a possible PG rating, the film was screened to make test audiences to please. One thing they tried to do again also is please the critics. Because of their lukewarm reception to Old Dogs, they had to make sure to please the critics in some way. Hey, an idea was to give a character Goldie, who looks like a Rule 34 version of Tweety Bird, and ew, I'm putting that image in my head now, to look a little bit sexy. Which, yeah, I'm not entirely sure how you could make this weird, really less sexy. But anyways, is to avoid, that was one of the main ways, and trying to win test screens. As for when the film got released it was originally released in 1991. However, due to competition from Disney yet again, and the creation being turned into a cowboy, it was moved to April 1992. It was transitioned again with another film, Ferngully The Last Rainforest. And get this, the chicken didn't win that box office battle. While Ferngully made only $33 million, Rock-A-Doodle made $11 million. And what about the critics? Well, that failed too. It received a lot of bad reviews, who gave the film mostly bad reviews for its narration, the songs, and the integration of live action animation. And of course, as for the film itself, for me, look, this is a kid's film through and through, and I don't mean that in a good way. This film is way too much oriented towards kids. I would hint, and it's many cases it's that film where unless you're really young, you're gonna be kind of confused. You're gonna be sure what to do here. The animation is good, and it does have a catchy soundtrack, but once it's not interrupted by the stupid narration by Pat 2. But still, honestly, I wish this film had gone with narration, because the film itself isn't terrible. But with the narration, it just tones the film down from just okay to just not very good. It's easily Don Bluth's most forgettable anime film. I would call it bad, but it's nowhere near good. And because of that, during this time, financial issues were coming back for Don Bluth. During this time, he made 2 more anime films during his time. However, he also worked on a 3rd video game as well, the sequel to Dragon Slayer 2 Time Warp. I already mentioned that he worked on Dragon Slayer 2 game, but after he was done working on a Tale and got some decent money for it, he restarted the project. In a sense, Dragon Slayer 2 Time Warp is basically the idea down pretty simple. The movie itself is about Doug and who's now married to his Princess Daphne, and well, they got a lot of kids because, you know. But because afterwards Daphne is kidnapped, and Doug has to go through different eras to help out. I know it's really time traveling, but I noticed that it's kind of a loose term. As he goes through Beethoven's musical, where he's the size of a mouse. He goes through an area of Alice in Wonderland, where he is Alice, and in the Garden of Eden with a fat E. Like I said before, this game was developed around the same time after the first game was finished. Now they had it built for the game, they tried making this work out. They initially also added golden trinkets, that way you could get all of them in but during the challenge, the trinkets would only appear for a very quick second. And if you get them all, you get them an easier method. However, if you don't get them all, you go through the harder method. However, these trinkets were added in because they thought trinkets made the game a little bit easier. Now they're necessary, and they went to the harder way too. Because the game will tell you optically that you have to get them. Maybe you have the usual clue to get a stone. And initially there was a scene of a pirate ship. However, the model of the ship somehow vanished. So yeah, that level was eventually scrapped. Again, due to the crash, the game was eventually scrapped for this time being. And eventually, they figured out how to get this film to work out. Because of the whole thing, Don and his crew had to finish the game up in the late 80s. And in 1991, it finally released. Unfortunately, the game did not do numbers. Why? Well, there are a few reasons why. Number one is that this was released in arcades in 1991. During this time, there were two consoles that people had getting out there: the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. People either had the Sega Genesis or the Nintendo, and as such, people weren't really interested in going back to arcades. That's just before more comic came out. So yeah, not only that, but this is during the time that we didn't know of Dragon's 2. So overall, it just failed in the arcades. Don Bluth was at 2 failures in a row. He really needed his extra projects to really jumpstart out. During the time Dragon's 2 was in the arcades, he made 2 new games in thoughts: A Treasure Park in 1990 and Thumbelina in 1981. Both films' budgets seemed to get bigger and bigger and ballooned up, and as such, he had to figure out how to get these films to work. So he said, let's see how this thing would work out. During this time, Don also noticed that his studio wasn't really turning out the successes that he needed to. So in a sense, he had to figure out how to make this work. The moment both the Treasure Park was finished, they decided to work at Thumbelina instead, based on Anastasia Anderson's story. The story of Thumbelina, a person who's about as tall as my actual microphone itself, who lives and falls in love with Prince Cornelius, even though he's a fairy and stuff. However, she eventually gets kidnapped by other suitors who would eventually try to help out and marry her. But however, when named Giacomo, Thumbelina eventually helped out in her own ways. Like I mentioned before, Thumbelina was initially started back in 1991 on stuff. Initially, it was against and it was a bit hard. Having read the book of it, he decided to see how it would work out. Due to Don Bluth's liquidation, however, during this time, a liquidation process was coming down. And eventually, money was starting to drain out of the studio. Because of the film itself, they were handed by the Irish High Court because it couldn't really pay off any of their budget, including getting money for Hong Kong's media assets and such during this time. Because of how the film, initial casting, they hired Jodie Benson, the voice of Ariel at the time, to see how the film was. To help out with getting the film being made by test audiences, they made a little short thing, the Disney logo, to put in the film. And you know what? Test audiences actually see the life of Disney film. Funnily enough, Thumbelina is actually on Disney Plus nowadays, so technically it counts as a Disney movie, I guess. They didn't do that in the theaters, of course. Instead, they put the Animaniacs short, I'm Mad. When it was released in 1994, it didn't really set the world on fire. The budget of this film was around $28 million, the most expensive Don Bluth film ever. However, it only made $17 million at box office. As for critics, they were more mixed. Saying the animation was great, but the storyline wasn't really all that great. Me personally, this is easily the most safe Don Bluth film. There's nothing offensively wrong with the film, but there's also nothing that's really fine with it. The animation is great, but the songs, the characters, and everything else is just safe. It's easily Don Bluth's most safe movie. And watching this, it's like, you can tell that Don Bluth was trying to emulate Disney best he could. Unfortunately, emulate Disney didn't mean it would go down well. However, his next film would eventually become even worse, with that being a Troll Central Park. Because of how successful Troll Central Park is about Stanley, who lives in a world of mean trolls and moblins from the Zelda games. The only difference is Stanley is a good troll, who has power to grab magical flowers with the power of his green thumb. However, the evil witch Gnorga doesn't like flowers, so he sends down into a place where no plant life can grow. Central Park? Yeah, you might have just screwed up on that one. We then meet two other characters named Gus and Rosie, who ran with their parents because Gus wanted to see Central Park. They're special because they're the other characters in the film. But then they meet Stanley, who eventually has to protect them from the evil witch Gnorga and from turning Stanley into stone. Just from the plot summary alone, you could tell that this film is rudimentary in storytelling. And when the production began in 1990, it didn't seem well. Don Bluth said best of the production part in this quote right here. I'm going to read off of the Wikipedia page. Bluth himself said this: "The development of a film is like the development of a child in a room. It takes time and get right. Doing the film on Central Park definitely taught us that lesson, but indeed the hard way. The film itself was initially meant to be a bit different. We cast for another thing. We initially have other things. Buddy Hackett and Robert Morley went through the voices of both Stanley and King Rourke, respectively. However, these were changed to Don DeLuise in his final appearance for Don Bluth, and Charles Nelson Riley. Again, his final appearance for a Don Bluth film that wasn't a sequel. That weren't sequels or a TV show. I didn't mention this earlier, but All Dogs Gotta Heaven also has a sequel that got released theatrically, a Christmas Carol adaptation, and a TV series, where Don DeLuise also returned and roles. For the film itself, to get the animation budget itself, in 1974, it's a new record with Don Bluth films. But I don't mean a good record. The Birdman itself had a budget of $23 million. However, it only made a grand total of $71,000. And as for the critics, it did not go well at all. It was even worse reviewed than both Thumbelina and Rock-A-Doodle. And how do I sum it up? Well, yeah, that is how I sum it up. This film was way too cutesy for anyone for me. I get this film, this one was made for little kids, but I shouldn't excuse how how stupid this film is. It is way too stupid for anyone to actually pass that. The storyline is cookie-cutter as hell. How most of the characters are either annoying or just wasted. It feels like the movie just has a tone that makes everyone feel like they're getting brainwashed. The only good thing is the animation, and that's it. The acting, great, and more. The creative census is the same as this movie. Afterwards, financial issues with Don Bluth Studio were getting worse. Not only were now the films really starting to get hit, they were now really starting to go badly. It was critics as well. Both Thumbelina and films now flopped in the box office or in total bombing. I mean, it was seeming that it was going, including part of the Irish government having to ask them to either pay off a loan. I can understand, and with Frank closed down the studio. I mean, I don't really blame them. The studio Don was paying expenses out of his pocket. The US studio was basically making zero money, and the Irish studio was laying off employees. So, you know, both studios, one in the US was one in the 80s, by the way, was being made. Had to get basically turned off. And unfortunately, this caused both to get made. Media assets had to, was the reason why I got held together. So, they only had to pray that the next film would be a success, which that film would be The Pebble And The Penguin. It's about Hubie, a penguin who has to give a pebble to his love interest Marina. Suddenly, Drake and his huge penguin tits love Marina too, and kidnap her. Now it's up to Hubie and a cranky, cynical penguin named Rocco to join save him after he got captured on a ship. During this time, MGM came back to be distributors instead of Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers helped release Thumbelina and Charlton Punk. However, later on, they were by Fox, and funny enough, this is actually the main reason why Thumbelina is actually on Disney Plus. It's because Fox still owns rights to it. We'll get to Fox in a bit, though. Now, because of the financial issues, Don Bluth and Gary Goldman were pushed to actually join a new animation studio in Fox. However, because they were still working on Penguin at the time, they all were coming at. They decided to work on Pebble and Penguin at the time. However, MGM proved to not be there. Everything would go smoothly, MGM did mail production. MGM mail production almost immediately. They asked to basically cut out the running time, change a few characters' lines, and redo a few scenes and more, and they had to do it quickly because they were reaching the deadline. To fix this, they actually had to outsource some of the scenes to Hungary. And unfortunately, the Hungarian scenes did not do great. Inconsistent coloring, where some shots appear to be too dark at times, and shots where characters look like they have been frozen. I get the film set in Antarctica, but even the film Frozen is less frozen than this. Don Bluth and Gary Goldman were so embarrassed in this film, they even took the name out of the credits. And as such, they distanced themselves away from this film. When Pebble and Penguin finally released in 1985, it proved that even this time they can be saved. Only making $4 million on a budget of $28 million. And the critics also gave it mixed reviews too. Not as bad as Troll, but still bad. Me personally, this is a really is just okay. It's really dumbed down to kids and all that, but I would say it's better than some of the other films that Don Bluth made during the 90s because at least it feels like it's trying. There is effort being put in there, even if it is being dumbed down towards kids and the songs aren't great. It is a decent film. The animation's still good. Some of the characters are likable, and the acting is actually pretty decent overall. But it really is the story that's main issue, and it really feels like this film isn't there. It also is way too short. This film's only about 66 minutes, and in terms of credits, and only 74 minutes with credits. Same money time as Rock-A-Doodle, and it shows. So overall, this film just didn't work out. And because of the big changes MGM was making at the time, Don Bluth and his crew moved over to Fox during the time. And during the interim, Don Bluth Studios went majorly downhill and eventually closed its doors in 1985. Many of the staff came back to work with Bluth at Fox. However, some of them decided to finally let him go, including his old buddy, John Pomeroy. Now that they were at Fox, they were now working on their first film, Anastasia. It's the tragedy of the Romanovs, when Rasputin, a former friend of the Romanovs, but the Duke shot him because he was a traitor, cast a curse on them that they would all die on that day. Only the youngest daughter, Anastasia, survived. However, she also had head and now has amnesia. A decade later, the girl is to find Anastasia, and two con men named Dmitri and Vladimir both help her in finding Anastasia. However, they find this girl named Anya. Though they know that Anya is secretly Anastasia. However, Rasputin knows this, and he will not rest until everybody single Romanov is at least dead. The idea of this film came out from the 16th century novel of Anastasia. However, it was also based on a 1950 film. There was a rumor at the time that Anastasia survived when the Romanovs were killed in 1917. However, in actuality, that rumor is not true. To get the animation right, they filmed the whole movie in CinemaScope, aka which is a widescreen technique that's been used since the 50s. The cast of roles were so this was also Don Bluth's first time in a long time working with actors he can actually get a decent name behind him. He had big names. This was the first time we had real-time celebrities who were relevant at the time to his films since Old Dogs Go to Heaven. In this case, having Meg Ryan as Anastasia, John Cusack as Dmitri, Kelsey Grammer as Vladimir, and Lloyd as Rasputin. Anyways, when getting the film down, every actor tried to get the film to work. They had This was also the first time that Don Bluth ever worked with CGI to an extensive extent. He had previously used it before in both Pebble and Penguin to help animate some extra scenes, but this was the first time he ever used it extensively in a film. Thankfully, due to the bigger budget, that's probably why. As for the same voice of Anastasia, the original voice didn't come in, and instead Liz Calloway came in instead. Because of how the film was budgeted, they actually used rotoscoping for the so they hadn't used it at all before for the models. Instead, having the pure ending of the animation still go through. When it was released in 1987, he still didn't even a long time. It was a success! At the box office, Anastasia became Don Bluth's highest grossing film at the time. And as for critics, they also loved it too. Well, some were mixed because of the historical inaccuracies. Others loved it because of the thematically and the celebration of the film. Having that kind of idea. While it did have issues with some of the elements of Disney Defector, it did work out well enough for the film. And in total $104 million, it made it easy Don Bluth's most successful film. Not long afterwards, he was asked to do the sequel. But before we get to the sequel, what are my thoughts on Anastasia? Personally, I actually really kind of like it. While I admit that it's not his best film, this is a good film nonetheless. Yes. It feels like exactly what Don Bluth was missing with Thumbelina. Exactly what he was missing. A film that actually feels like it was competent, a film that actually does take risks, feels like it was made by Disney, but not too much, and it has that kind of fantastic feel of actually having to work. This isn't to criticize Thumbelina and say it's terrible and anything the film's okay. This is really showing the evolution of Don Bluth's craft, and how this was really him as a new peak. The animation is great, the songs are wonderful. It's overall just a great movie. There are all flaws with it, but honestly, they're nothing to ruin the experience. They also made they decided to make a sequel to it later on, Bartok Magnificent. Now, this is the only sequel that Don Bluth and his crew ever really worked on in a sense, and it really isn't much of the productions, okay? Production on this film, okay? It was only released home direct to video. Me personally, it's a decent film. It isn't terrible, but it is what you get from a direct-to-video film. It's good, but there really isn't anything spectacular about it. Another note is that this is the cast members for that return. And the only three cast members return would be Andrea Martin, Kelsey Grammer, and Hank Azaria. The latter, which voiced Bartok in both films. It's seen that Don Bluth was at the height of his career. But there was one other film he had to work on afterwards to see if this was a real tester. And that film was Titan AE. Set in the futuristic world year of 3028, the Earth has been blown up by alien creatures known as the Dredge. Okay, we're starting off somewhere else. They blow it off out of fear of a thing called a Titan, which can form a new planet. Humans have been stranded, but now they can't really do so. So, one of the humans, Corso, helps find a boy who had held a Titan, a piece of the Titan can lead them away with a rain, named Kale. Along with his crew, which including his pilot Kima, his weapons expert Stitch, his scientist and Brains Goon, and his marksman Preed. They had to find the Titan before the Dredge all get back. Like with Anastasia, due to the big this one was originally filmed by Fox. However, this was the big project by Fox, and by big I mean they committed to this project in many ways. They were committed to this project to see how this film would do at all. They want to see how this. Okay, it had been pitched to work on ever since the early 90s. Initially, even being done by a live action film. However, it was changed in 1997 to be an animated film and get picked up by Don Bluth and Get Going, who, get this, aren't really sci-fi guys. Aside from Space Ace, they really weren't really the sci-fi type. Right. But because Fox was committed to this film come hell or high water, they decided to do this film out of, regardless of how inexperienced they were in the sci-fi genre. This also had the biggest budget of $75 to $99 million. To help out with this film, they got a screenplay written by many people, including my guy named Joss Whedon. by this time, he was more known for Buffy the Vampire Slayer than the Marvel films. So just FYI, that's probably why he had stuff. In terms of the soundtrack, it is nothing but alternative rock songs. Even in the trailer of the movie, they actually used the song "Higher" by Creed. However, as for the casting, like the last film, they actually made this film because of the bigger budget. They cast big name actors at the time too, including Matt Damon as Kale, Bill Pullman as Corso, John Leguizamo as Goon, Nathan Lane as Preed, Janeane Garofalo as Stiff, and Drew Barrymore as Akima. To get more done, they used CGI extensively in this film. The CGI was used to make several machines, including one of the vehicles being including half of a car being a jet ski. Most of the CGI was controlled by Bluesky Studios in its infancy, more known today as the studio that made films like Ice Age, Robots, Horn Hears a Who, and Rio. However, Fox Animation Studios was already losing money at this point. They had to, despite Anastasia being a hit, they didn't really have much of residuals, and spent most of the money trying to figure out how to Tiny E. They needed Tiny E to be success. A budget of 75, with all the costly CGI implications, the soundtrack and all, they needed Tiny E to at least be a success. The film Tiny E was released in the summer of 2000 when it was released. The film bombed hard. Tiny E is a very cliched space swamp. I don't mean it's bad, but you can tell this is a space film nonetheless. It's a space swamp that takes place in the intergalactic that basically follows every space cliche in the books. It's not terrible, but it's hard to see how this film is. But that's probably the main issue. It's very cliche. The animation is good, but the CGI looks like it came off of a PlayStation 1 game. And I mostly blame this because it came out in the year 2000. And back then, the CGI was still pretty new at the time. This was only 5 years after Toy Story released. So it was still pretty new. And as such, it did look pretty rough. And critics were also mixed to it too. Thinking with the film having up and down stuff, praising the visuals, animation, but criticizing the characters and story. However, while that was an issue, the box office was another story entirely. On its opening weekend, it went in 4th place, and the film only made a grand total of $36 million worldwide. The main issue was probably due to competition in summer months, and the fact that people were unsure of this film. Not long after this, about 10 days after Tiny E came into studios, Fox Animation Studios closed down. So, on the bright side, I do have elements of the Tiny E has no cult following, and although I myself am more up and down with the film, I admit that there are elements to like. I actually don't mind the characters myself, they're pretty good, the animation is very good, and I actually don't mind the soundtrack being made of totally rock songs. When I heard the Lit song, I was actually grooving out. No joke. I'm stuck for some early 2000s pop punk. But even then, it's ruined by a cliched story. But yeah, and you can tell and twists that really don't really add much. And as of 2000, this is the last film that Don Bluth would ever work on. During this time, he was asked to make another film called Ice Age. However, due to the fact that Fox Animation Studios was being closed down and all that, it was instead given to another team, and it was given to Bluesky Studios to make their feature film debut with the 2002 film Ice Age. As Don Bluth's main career, he mostly scaled back his production sets, instead of being more of an animation tutor and teaching world, making other animation areas. And to this day, he decided to make fun. He has been working on other things, including music video for the Band Scissor Sisters and a short called Gift of the Hoopoe, as well as trying to get a Dragon's Den movie pitch off the ground. Me personally, I would love to see how this movie could work. I can easily see a Dragon's Den movie with Ryan Gosling in the works, but nothing has come to eventuate as of yet. Don Bluth is one of those directors that really is someone who has been making a name for himself. So he came in as Disney's biggest competition during the 80s. A guy who actually worked at Disney at one point. But because he saw how Disney was doing at the time, he changed it up and gave a new name for animation in an era that was pretty dark for animation in film wise. He has to figure out how to do the idea, how to make film afterwards. However, after his rise in the 80s, the 90s proved to be a bigger strike when Disney unleashed the Renaissance at us, giving us such films as The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. Don Bluth had to find a way to climb back up the social ladder, and even when he had it, and even when he had it with Anastasia, he lost immediately with Tiny E. Don Bluth is a great director. He has some amazing great works. It's just that he works. I feel like his later works are the result of executive meddling, where his later works he had more control and freedom. If you have the time, I recommend watching Secret of Nimh, Land Before Time, Anastasia, American Tail, All Good Heaven, and even Tiny. The other films, it's up to you if you want to watch Rock-A-Doodle, Thumbelina, Pebble and the Penguin, and especially A Children's Park. But I recommend watching at least his first 4 films, and his next films, and Anastasia and Tiny E. Okay. Before we end off the podcast, I would like to if you want to watch wherever else it goes, you can watch it on YouTube, on Spotify, and listen to it on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, so please subscribe to my Patreon, and please follow me on Bluesky, where I can And until next time, I will see you all later.